As I first began to conceive of this year's High Holy Day sermons, my family was eagerly anticipating the birth of my nephew. On Erev Tisha B'Av, about 4 days before his due date, I casually texted my brother and sister-in-law saying, "No pressure, but according to the Jewish tradition, if the baby is born before sundown tomorrow, he could be the Messiah." My brother and sister-in-law had also been rooting for the little one to arrive that weekend, in part so that he might share a birthday with Neil Armstrong, and in part to ease my sister-in-law's discomfort at being pregnant in August. They hadn't even considered the teaching that the darkest day of the Jewish calendar, commemorating the destruction of the ancient temple in Jerusalem, might also be the day that the Messiah is born. We acknowledge the redemptive potential of birth every time we welcome a child into the covenant of the Jewish people. Our baby naming liturgy says that every child comes into the world with a message, that God is not discouraged with us. For with every child comes the hope for new possibilities. For each new soul is testimony to our conviction that we still believe that life is good. Our Rosh Hashana Machzor is rich with narratives about the redemptive power of pregnancy and childbirth. This imagery signifies hope, possibilities, and the potential for renewal. In our shofar service, we proclaim hayom, harat, olam, which is usually translated as, "Today is the day of the world's birth," or today the world is born anew. But harat olam does not actually mean the birthday of the world. Anyone who has ever received a birthday call from me knows that birthday in Hebrew is yom huledet. Harat olam does not connote birth, but rather pregnancy. And in its original context, its most accurate translation is actually kind of terrifying. Harat olam means eternally pregnant. Rabbi Naomi Levy writes, "Hayom harat olam" is a phrase spoken by the prophet Jeremiah in a moment of utter despair. Jeremiah spent his career offering the word of God to the Jewish people. Jeremiah pleaded with them to change their ways and stop the corruption, the sins, the materialism, the empty rituals, and the shallow prayers. Did they listen to him? No. Instead, they scorned him and ignored him. Jeremiah became dejected. He was sick of being a prophet who never got heard. "If only my mother had not given birth to me," he said, "Virachma harat olam." If only her womb was pregnant forever. At this point, you might be guessing at the ideological direction of this sermon, and you would be half right. This biblical phrase resonated with me deeply at a moment when we're contemplating the very real power and terror that pregnancy and birth still hold in our lives and our society. But as this sermon was gestating, I realized it was going to be twins. Tomorrow, I want to speak about reproductive justice. But tonight, I want to explore the power of harat olam as a metaphor. As we welcome a new year, we consider what might it mean for this new year to be born? And what might it mean for us to be eternally pregnant? Aside from all of the discomfort and anxiety that might accompany an actual pregnancy, in its most positive sense, to be pregnant is to be filled with possibility, quite literally to the point of bursting. Pregnancy is pure potential, a cluster of cells, a genetic pattern that might someday become a fully fledged human being. And that human being, as my niece says, teeny tiny as they might start out, has the potential to live a life that we can only begin to imagine. Even farther beyond our comprehension is that one day, what started as a cluster of cells might give birth to a new generation. On this, the day of the world's birth, we imagine that the new year, too, is pregnant with possibility. We read biblical tales of long-awaited births and eat round foods, a gently swelling challah, a pomegranate splitting open to spill its seeds. We contemplate what kind of year and what kind of self we want to give birth to. Excuse me. But as with any pregnancy, to embark upon a new year is also filled with risk. What if we try something new and we fail? What if we try to change but fall back into the same bad patterns? What if we do manage to change or to create something new, only to find that it upsets the delicate balance of our lives? And what if we're stuck or blocked and end up doing nothing at all? What if we're pregnant forever? Rabbi Levy suggests that every single one of us, somewhere in our lives, we are pregnant forever. There is something we've already conceived that is pleading with us, let me be born. Maybe it's a creative endeavor, maybe it's a career shift, maybe it's the words I'm sorry, or the words I love you, or the words I forgive you. They are fully formed inside your mouth, but you haven't gotten up the courage to actually speak them. Maybe it's a departure you're holding on to. You know it's time to stop pretending that everything is fine when nothing is fine. But sometimes this horrifying idea of eternal pregnancy feels less frightening than the alternative of birth. Says Rabbi Levy, some of us are pregnant forever because we're comfortable being pregnant forever. And that's where Jeremiah comes in with his haunting phrase, hayom, harat, olam. Today is pregnant forever, and you are the one who gets to choose what will remain in a state of eternal potential and what will break forth into life. No matter what we are holding on to and for how long, the blast of the shofar reminds us that we cannot stay pregnant forever. The water breaks and the contractions begin. Midrash Tanchuma suggests that the 100 blasts of the shofar over the course of the holiday of Rosh Hashana correspond to the 99 times a woman cries out in pain while in labor, possibly a conservative estimate on the rabbi's part. The 100th blast is the cry of birth, a cry of joy, relief, and exultation. We accompany these primal cries with biblical stories of auspicious births. While neither Sarah nor Hannah was technically pregnant forever, each endured a long period of waiting before giving birth. Rabbi Tali Adler in particular, calls out Hannah for being caught in an endless cycle of waiting and wanting, signified by the repetitive phrases miyamim yamima, in those days, and shana b'shana, year after year. Each year, year after year, Hannah travels with her husband, her co-wife, and her co-wife's many children to make an offering at the temple in Shiloh. Each year, she is taunted by her co-wife for being barren, such that she cries and refuses to eat, and her husband is powerless to comfort her. This would be an unpleasant family outing even one time. But this same pattern enacts itself again and again, year after year. But Hannah is not destined to be pregnant forever. All this time, there has been something growing within her. Probably a fair amount of resentment towards her husband and her co-wife, but also the belief that her life has a purpose and the hope that things might be different someday soon. After reenacting the same family drama year after year, Hannah decides it's time for something new to be born. She climbs the steps of the temple and offers a prayer from her heart. In this moment, says Rabbi Adler, Hannah moves from sitting on the sidelines of her own life to standing and taking control. Hannah dares to dream of and to demand a different life for herself. Give me a child, she says to God, and together you and I will create a new world. Hannah's prayer and the child that results from it indeed create a new world. The birth of Samuel, the anointing of King David, even the very concept of personal prayer that we still perform today, all stem from the moment Hannah stands up and refuses to accept her life as it is. In this moment in which a woman desperate to be a mother dares to dream of a different life, the fate of the Jewish people is changed forever. On this day, as the new year begins, we ask ourselves, what is the different life that we are dreaming about? What is this new world that we want to create? And what is holding us back from giving birth to it? There are likely many different and deeply personal answers to these questions in our community tonight. And there are also many ways in which we, as a congregation, might feel as if we have been pregnant forever. Years ago, the leadership of this community conceived of what our next chapter would look like. Our visionary lay leadership, in partnership with our founding rabbi, Elliot Holin, raised funds for a bridge to the future. We engaged a new rabbi and a new religious school director. Together, we developed a plan to sell our high school road property and become renters so that we could be more nimble and sustainable in the years to come. We planned to make an endowment so that we could continue to exist in the world as this unique community for as long as humanly possible. And then COVID happened. Nevertheless, we persisted. We sold our property, we built our endowment, we brokered a deal to move in here at Beth Shalom campus with plans for construction to create dedicated space for us and new shared technology that would bring our new streaming system out of my dining room and into the 21st century. Last year at this time, as I stood right here, this new arrangement felt pregnant with possibility. And then there were more COVID variants and supply chain issues, zoning challenges, technology hiccups, construction delays. All this time we have been moving gradually towards that vision we had back on High School Road. But at the same time, the gestation for this vision now rivals that of the African elephant, 2 years. It feels like we have been pregnant forever as a community. But all that time, while it may not always have looked like much was happening, underneath the surface, the cells were still dividing and multiplying. Much of what we had hoped for in this space, though long overdue, is on the verge of becoming a reality. This summer, we were finally able to install our eternal light with thanks to Justin Crick for building the apparatus. We were also able to install our yahrzeit board and our donor wall. We now have offices for our staff, and soon, finally, we will have our own sign on Old York Road. We are forming relationships with our counterparts here at Beth Shalom in hopes that our partnership going forward can be a fertile and fruitful one. And now, as Joni Mitchell sang, there can be new dreams, maybe better dreams, and plenty. Now we have the opportunity to ask ourselves, what do we as a community want to give birth to this year? Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav once said, "The day you were born was the day the world decided it could no longer exist without you." Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik added that each of us was born with a particular set of talents at a particular moment so that we could fulfill a particular mission during our lifetime. Kol Ami came into the world nearly 30 years ago because of people who believed that the world needed us. An intimate and dynamic, progressive and inclusive community in Elkins Park. Many things have changed in those 3 decades. And in the years to come, we might be called upon to fulfill our sacred mission in new ways. But the essence of what we were put here to do remains unchanged. Our community still needs us as a welcoming space and a voice for justice, a place to build a rich, participatory, joyful, and musical prayer life, Our community still needs us to provide a loving and supportive environment for people of all ages, backgrounds, and life situations to learn and grow, to create meaning in our lives, and to build connections with one another. Whether we are considering what we want to give birth to as individuals or as a community, we are in for a long labor. Following this metaphor to its logical conclusion, childbirth and nursing, child-rearing and adolescence don't promise to be any easier. But our tradition reminds us that this is the way it has always been. And more often than not, the pain is worth it. Rabbi Alan Liu writes that this is the bet that life always makes against us. Life bets that we won't be willing to endure the suffering it requires. Life bets that we will try to shut out the suffering, and so shut out life in the bargain. Tisha B'Av has a hot tip for us. Take the suffering, take the loss, turn toward it, embrace it, let the walls come down. Legend has it that the Messiah will be born on Tisha B'Av, the darkest day of the Jewish calendar. But the Bible tells us that this Messiah will also descend from some of the most complicated figures and relationships in our sacred story. The famously flawed King David, Ruth the Moabite widow, and Perez, a child conceived through an illicit union between Judah and Tamar. A blogger known as Juniverse writes, "This vision of the Messiah may be unexpected, but it can still be inspiring. Salvation will not emerge from some sort of magical flawlessness. The search for redemption is rooted in the real world. The beginning may be gritty, but the dream of a perfected world is still possible." In the end, my nephew, Miles Apollo Berkowitz, or Milo, was not born on Tisha B'Av, much to my disappointment. He was born a week past his due date, a full day after my sister-in-law was scheduled to be induced. And for a moment there, it did seem like she might be pregnant forever. But he's here now. He is both a testament to everyone who has come before him and the beginning of an entirely new chapter of our people's story, along with his sister. We can't wait to see who he will become, and we can't wait to see what kind of world might be born with him finally in it. Shana Tova.